I never did what was required. I always felt like, okay, this is what they're telling me to do. Everybody has to do that. So now what am I going to do on top of that to separate myself? And every single day, it may have been a millimeter, an inch of separation, but over time, over 5 years of college, it became a big span. It became huge.
Welcome, everybody, to the first edition ever of the Keep the Line Moving podcast. I am your host, Chris Gargano. The title means it's a baseball term. Keep the lineup moving by hitting behind the runner, bunting, sac flies, whatever the case may be. Unselfish play. That's what we're going to talk about throughout this podcast, which is leadership, how to be a servant leader, how to engage with your employees, how to make the culture better. The nuances of leadership will be discussed in this podcast every week, as well as the great life stories of our guests and their overcoming adversity, their inspiration, how they are successful, how they focus, how they stay present. I really hope you enjoy this journey of this podcast. Ladies and gentlemen, our first guest is Anthony Becht. He's a friend of mine. We were colleagues at the New York Jets. Anthony was a broadcaster. I was the executive producer, vice president, and we loved working together. Well, I'll let him tell you that. He's the first guest for this reason. He's the new head coach of the St. Louis BattleHawks of the XFL. That's right. The Rock and Danny Garcia have relaunched the XFL. They begin playing this spring. So everybody, this is Anthony Becht. He has a story. You're going to hear it now. We start with his childhood in Pennsylvania.
Drexel Hill, Pennsylvania was the exact town, about 20 minutes right outside of Philadelphia. So when I tell people I grew up in Philly, I really grew up on the outskirts there in the suburb area. Really, they call that area Delco, PA. It's kind of a slang word for Delaware County. Blue collar, great family area. I grew up going to Catholic school my entire life, boy and girl school, sweater, tie, button shirt in grade school, and then went to Monsignor Bonner High School, which was an all-boys Catholic school at the time. That ended up merging probably about a decade ago. But when I was there, it was girls' school was right next door, and then there was the all-boys school there. So, it was kind of a semi-private opportunity, really through grade school and high school, but just very family oriented. People worked hard. They were the folks that cared about, family and tradition. And my parents, my dad in particular, worked hard over the stretch of time, but it was something growing up. We may not have had everything, but I felt like I had everything. My parents did everything they could to provide me with the new cleats, the bats, the gloves, the equipment, everything I always had. I always felt like we were good to go. We were always rich in the sense of there was always the need to have things, and I had them. But in the same sense, as I got older and knew, how hard my dad worked and the hours he put in, always there for my games, always made that time. So that was always important, and really is a reflection of how I am now with my family.
So that influence from your family, it was a solid upbringing, and you saw great examples of hard work. So needless to say, your family were your role models when you were growing up. Were there any coaches or any other outside influences that shaped who you are today? There
was a ton of coaches. I played multiple sports, baseball, basketball, football. Baseball was my passion and my love. Ferdy Esposito and Dennis Reardon were my two baseball coaches throughout my early career. We played in the Babe Ruth 13-year-old World Series. And I just really learned a lot about commitment, hard work, and dedication to sports when I was with them. I was always good in football and basketball as well, but football was something that flourished with me later. And a lot of those coaches helped me along the way early on. But that commitment to team and that dedication to working your craft and being great at a young age really triggered when I was 13 years old, and I played on that team with those two coaches.
And that's a beautiful story that you just told about your childhood and how that 13-year-old year and that baseball team that was really good kind of ignited a passion in you just to be great. So, Anthony, you go through high school and you have one scholarship offer. Could you tell that story and how you got to West Virginia? And how did that upbringing prepare you to be resilient at the college level when you decided to go all in on football?
Yeah, it's really a fascinating story, Chris. High school, I played on a very good high school team. We were loaded with seniors for the football team. I think 21 of the 22 starters were seniors, and we won the championship. And quite frankly, I was a big piece of the team, but I wasn't the piece of the team. We had 5 or 6 other players that were really, really good players, college level guys. But everybody had something where, quarterback was all state, but what didn't have the size. We had another receiver that me and him were like called the bookends. He was 6'5", 225. I was 6'5", 185. I was not a big guy physically, but I had the height. I had something there. The recruiting process was a struggle for me. There were, at the time, schools were looking at me, I wasn't, from a tight end standpoint, I wasn't big enough and strong enough to play tight end, and I wasn't fast enough to be a receiver. So where was I? I was a project, and everybody kind of wanted guys now at that time. So I remember me and my dad at the time, we made VCR tapes, highlight tapes, put them in envelopes, and we sent them out to the top 30 schools in the country. Now, so half of them probably got back. You could be a walk-on. I remember getting letters from Lou Holtz and stuff, whoever typed them out, just, it was considered, hey, you could come, be a walk-on, pay your way. And I just had a desire. Something I was passionate about me was I wanted to get a scholarship. I had great grades. I worked hard, but I was underdeveloped. Someone had to take a chance on me. There was a lot of recruiting in the next level down, which was called Division I AA at the time. And a lot of those schools were just like, oh, well, who's interested? What? And they were worried about who was going to offer me. And no one offered me. So no one was really stepping on the pedal to do it. I remember in January, about 2 weeks before signing, which is normally the beginning of February. And I had reached out to West Virginia, just pulled out one of the business cards of one of the coaches, never spoke to him, never met him before. His name was Bill Kurlavich. He recruited the area, but never came to see me. And I had no offers at the time. I called that number up, and I got his assistant on the phone. Her name was Dixie Sisler. I remember this with clarity. She was like, hey, she's like, how you doing? I was like, hey, I'm Anthony Becht. I played tight end at, Monsignor Bonner High School. I was just wondering if Coach Kurlavich, I chopped his name up, didn't really even say it right. And she's like, well, unfortunately, Coach is on the road recruiting, but, I'll leave a message. And I was like, oh, here we go. He'll never get it. So I left a message, told him I was. A couple of days later, I got a call from him, and he's got a really crusty, cigar-filled voice. He's like, Anthony, he talks like he's a kind of just a heavy, thick voice guy, old school coach. Like, I'm coming into town, and this and that. He's like, I'm gonna come see. He's like, are you a legit 6'5"? I said, yes. He's like, well, how much do you weigh? And I knew my weight was always an issue because I wasn't really into the weight room stuff yet, because I always into that mentality where, don't lift early on in your life because it'll stunt your growth. And I was growing. I was like, okay, that kind of stuck with me. So I was always like push-ups, sit-ups. I didn't really know how to gain weight. And I lied to him. I was like, well, I'm 215 pounds, come see me. And he's asking me how much I bench. And I'm like, man, I had no idea what to say. I was like, I bench 185. And he kind of like, he's like, listen, as long as you're a legit 6'5", I'm going to come by your school this week. I'm in the area. I want to come see you. I was like, oh, great. This is my first time a coach is really taking the time to see me. Came through. He's like, all right, a little trim. He's like, but you know what? Let's do this. I want to bring you up this week, visit the head coach, Don Nealon. So like, long story short, it's a week before signing. Everybody's pretty much locked in. I have no offers. I'm supposed to fly to Morgantown that weekend. It's snowing, big snowstorm. I was supposed to leave on Friday, stay till Sunday. Everything got canceled. I didn't get in till I think it was about 3 or 4 o'clock on that Saturday at one day. So I went in single lane all the way down from Pittsburgh Airport, I-79 south to Morgantown, got to Morgantown. I immediately went to see the head coach, sat down in his office. It was my first recruiting visit. I had no visits. I had nothing lined up, not even at 1AA schools. I had not been anywhere yet. And Coach Nealon sat me down, and he's like, listen, Anthony, he's like, we went back, we reevaluated tape, and here's the situation. The tight end that we signed on board just decided to go somewhere else. He's like, it's late in the game. We see a little bit of something in you when we watched your film that maybe you can grow into something. Possibly your junior or senior year, you'll get big enough and you'll be able to maybe help us out, special teams, and develop yourself down the road. And I'm thinking to myself, okay, coach, like, what's that mean? He's like, well, do you want to be a Mountaineer? I was like, wow, this guy just offered me a scholarship, Division I, Big East football, which, back then in the mid 90s was basically the SEC of football. And I was like, wow, like, what an opportunity. And that basically triggered it. I remember going back home the next day, and there was a basketball game. I got there right before we went. A lot of the football players and my teammates were on the basketball team. No one believed it. Like, we had players on our team that were getting looked at and this and that. And here I am. I get a Division I big time football opportunity. And it didn't really matter, what the coach said about me when I play or all that stuff. All I heard was there was a window, a crack, and I got in, and here's my chance. And that's when my mind started saying, okay, how do I take advantage of this and the resources? And everything from there kind of took an upward trajectory.
All right. I'm fired up right now. That story is so awesome. And okay, so you're the head coach of the St. Louis BattleHawks. We're going to get to that in a second. And you're going to be in front of a group of people and trying to motivate them weekly, starting in training camp, obviously, and then weekly for your games. And they're going to need to know about what does this guy stand for. So you just articulated taking advantage of an opportunity. And there's windows of opportunities throughout our lives that we need to take advantage of. And you as a leader and somebody who has observed leadership, been a leader, been on these teams in the NFL collegiately, and you just told your collegiate story. Anthony, how did you create that opening with that coach in West Virginia on that snowy day back in the mid-90s? If you look back on it now, how did that manifest itself? Was it hard work? Was it that conversation with the grassly voice that you guys had? What was it? Was there a key moment or a series of moments that you feel you created that?
Yeah, it's a great question, because I think a lot of people look at me, Chris, maybe like yourself when you first met me, and some of the people that see me now, and they see the finished product, and they see first round draft pick. They see successful broadcasting career. They see XFL head coach, and they see all these accolades, but they don't know what is under the underlying tiers of what it took to get there. And I think the biggest thing, when you mentioned about being in front of my team, recently I just had my first team meeting through Zoom with my players. I don't know when this is going to be out there, but the night before we actually recorded this. And I think the biggest sell for me to them was, they see the accolades, they see what I've done. But from that point, when I got that opportunity at West Virginia, there was always doubt at every level. I've always done something. There was always doubt about me going to West Virginia. When I came back home and told folks, well, maybe you should go somewhere where you're going to play, you're going to have more opportunity. Yeah, you'll get a great education, but, do you want to play ball? Is that important to you? And I said, I didn't care about that. I said I was going to, make the most of it and do everything and every resource that school allowed me to have. I was going to take advantage of it. Parlayed that into not only not playing just special teams, but getting on the field after my redshirt year and becoming, after my junior season, one of the top tight ends in all of the nation because of the work and the discipline. I sacrificed spring break. My wife laughs at me to this day, that I never took advantage of spring break. And I sacrificed summers and going home and being around my family during that space. Because when I hit the weight room, when I started, really immersing myself in the game of football and everything it took, and seeing players that got there that were called blue chip All-Americans, and I was like, man, I'm so behind. How do I catch up? But I wasn't worried about them. I was worried about me. How do I better myself every day? I always did more. I never did what was required. I always felt like, okay, this is what they're telling me to do. Everybody has to do that. So now what am I going to do on top of that to separate myself? And every single day, it may have been a millimeter, an inch of separation, but over time, over 5 years of college, it became a big span. It became huge. Everybody sees the finished product, Chris, but quite frankly, they need to understand the layers of how I got to the finished product, because it wasn't handed out to me. It was taken and I took it, but there are ways to get there. And it really came down to that sacrifice, hard work, determination, and really failures to get to where you need to be, and understanding that you have to recircuit yourself in anything you do differently moving forward.
I love it. I want to highlight a couple of things from that. So, and you alluded to folks that are listening to this, whether they're, reinventing themselves, pivoting in their careers, trying to get to the next level in any way, shape, or form, doing whatever it is that they're doing. Here's something I want to underline that you said in that story right there. So you're at West Virginia throughout your 4 years there playing tight end. You rose to being one of the best tight ends in the country. Coach would say to you, and these are your words, coach would say to you, okay, here's what you guys need to do. Hit the weight room. And you sacrificed, as you said, your wife still laughs at you, spring breaks and going home and visiting with family, friends, partying, whatever the case may be. Coach says, here's what I need you to do, the weight program, the training program, practice, running, whatever. You filed that in, and then you said, I'm going to do extra. That's the key, Anthony. That's what that can correlate to anyone doing anything. Here's what is required. What else can you do to be great? In the leadership space, that means, okay, day in, day out, you're working your 8, 9, 10 hours a day. What are you consuming? How are you getting better as a leader? So, Anthony, what was it like the minute you got drafted by the Jets and that hard work specifically at West Virginia was rewarded?
It was surreal. I wasn't predicted to be a first round pick. It's funny because right after my last game of my senior year, everybody knows who Mel Kiper is. He's the draft guru that was out there, and he really was the only guy at the time that was out there. Now we have so many more, but he came out with a book and a label that had all these different players where they're at, and really he pegged me for early third, late second round. And again, not accepting what people think that you can do and proving them wrong. Again, another critical step in my career, and how it was, even though it was a short span of time, but really a span of time that helped me elevate to get to the first round. When you're done playing ball, there's a process from January to the draft in end of April that you can really excel and help yourself. You've already 90% of the work has been done on the tape and everybody's evaluating you. So now what are the next couple things and steps that can get you to that pinnacle? There was an all-star game, which was the Senior Bowl. There was the combine training for the combine, and then ultimately your interview process and how you, quite frankly, sell yourself to your bosses, or who the people that are going to take you under your wing and really put their trust in you. So every one of those levels up to the Senior Bowl, I did everything possible to prepare for the moment when I got there. I understood it every waking second. Everything I did was being looked at from every coach, scout. I just knew the importance of every movement that I made. And I tell this to all the younger players, guys coming up, they take for granted the valuable seconds in between the things that they're actually doing when people they think are watching them. And really sometimes the things that really matter are what I was doing in between my rep, what I was doing in between the time that I was doing my play, how I was, standing next to the coach. All those things in my mind just registered to me that were important. And then I went out and dominated every moment of that practice and game. Then the combine came. I shut down football. The combine was about drills. It was about quite honestly, mathematics. And you're thinking about mathematics. When you go do these drills, it's about angles and cuts. I remember we had measurements, and we were kind of ahead of the game with my trainer and how we were going to attack the angles of the 3-cone and the shuttle, and just being able to dial in on that only, okay? Because it wasn't football. It was about these silly drills and how I could be the best at them. And to this day, Chris, these times and the things that I've done at the weight that I was at are still some of the best cumulative times of any tight end in the last 25 years of the combine. No one talks about it, but again, the next step, how did I dominate the next step? And then after that, how do you sit in a meeting and talk to a coach, a GM? And it's necessarily not about football. They want to know about you, the person, what it took to get here. What were your struggles? What are your minuses? What are the negatives, things that are part of your game? Do you have any? Being able to tell these GMs and different coaches exactly, what you're about and what your makeup is. So everything is in that window of those months. And then ultimately someone believes in you. And now it's like, oh, well, Beck's moving up. Now he's a first round guy, and how that all goes down. So was able to parlay everything in those different moments and sections, okay, where sometimes you think you need a year to elevate yourself. That window of time was so crucial that every single day, from the day I left West Virginia to the day I got drafted, propelled me to get to the point where I was to be a first-round pick.
A point that we could take away from that, there's several, is this, which you said, which matters so much, is what are you doing in between the reps? So you're at Indianapolis, where the combine's annually held. You're out on the field, and you've got all the coaches and GM painting a visual for everybody. The coaches, GMs are all sitting there. They all had their places where they sat. And okay, here's Anthony Becht, tight end out of West Virginia, 6'5", 205. You run the 40. So what do you do when you come back? They're watching everything. They're about to invest millions of dollars in these athletes. So to your point, it's body language. What are you looking at? What are you paying attention to? How do you deal with fatigue? When you do the bench press, in that room with the coach is firing you up. How do you respond to that? Do you after you're done, do you get off? Do you get up with energy and enthusiasm? What is your facial expression? That's what everybody's looking at. It's the same that could be correlated and extended to a boardroom or anything with in the professional world. It's not about necessarily the job. It's how you're handling yourself within the confines of your environment. I love that, Anthony. So you get drafted, you go to the Jets, rookie year, Parcells is the GM, Al Groh's the coach. What are you like? How do you acclimate to becoming an NFL player? And to the point about doing the extra, how did that benefit you in your rookie year? Because you played very, very well. You got some awards and everything.
Yeah, I learned a very valuable lesson very early on in my NFL career. It really changed me as a player, and it kind of got me back on track. When I became a first-round pick, there were 4 of us. It was kind of a unprecedented time, not only for the Jets organization, for the NFL. I'd never been 4 first-round picks drafted in the same year. I was the 4th of those four players taken. Myself, Chad Pennington, John Abraham, and Sean Ellis. I was the 27th pick. And I remember just, when you come into the league at that level, everything is so catered to you, and, all the media, the pats on the back. Again, we talked about those things that everybody sees that pinnacle part of you and kind of raises you up, and you get kind of lost a little bit with that initial success because you're there, you made it, but yet you don't understand that the day you've made it in the NFL, regardless of the round that you've been brought in, the next day, none of that means anything, because now you're in a different level. You're in a different world, a different space, and you have to, earn the respect of your teammates, your coaching staff, and how you go about that on a day-to-day basis, quite frankly, will kind of shape your career on how you are as a player, and maybe how long you'll be as a player. So I remember my first preseason game. Of the 3 other guys that were drafted in the first round, I was the guy that was kind of propelled into a spot where I had to play kind of early. There was not really a defined tight end there. Fred Baxter, a long-time serviceable tight end for the Jets, was a guy that was like always a long-time backup. And I was a guy that came in, the young guy that was trying to take that spot and be the man the first day. I remember the first preseason game we played against New Orleans, and I went out, played a good game. Didn't play the whole game, obviously, in preseason, but I had like 3 or 4 catches. I caught a touchdown. Here I'm thinking to myself, man, there was articles in the paper of how well I played and, what a great pick. And I'm reading these articles and I'm seeing this stuff. People are, they weren't texting me at the time because we couldn't text, but they were calling me and leaving me messages. And I remember the next day we were on the practice field, and Bill Parcells was kind of before practice walking on the sidelines. And I remember him yelling at me from across the field. And he's like, hey, Becht, come on over here. Come on over here. I'm thinking to myself, I never really felt out of place going to Coach Parcells, because he's such an imposing person as far as his demeanor as a coach and what he's done in his career, because I hadn't really got the brunt of what kind of guy he really was. He was kind of more accepting and perching me up in through the draft process when I visited him. But now I was there, and this was my first kind. He was actually pulling me to him to speak with. And as I'm jogging over, in my mind, I'm thinking about, man, here we go. He's gonna be like, what? He's probably thinking, what a great pick I was, and all these great things I did in the game last night, and how things are headed in the right direction. And he's probably going to compare me to one of the great tight ends he had in his past. He pulled me aside, brought me on, and he's like, listen, Beck, he's like, let me tell you something. He's like, if you ever go out on a football field while I'm here and block like that and put that kind of bleep crap on that tape again like that, you'll never play on a Bill Parcells team again. And my mouth kind of dropped. And here I'm thinking I was going to get patted on the back for the great performance, the touchdown catch, but yet there were other things in my game that were glaring that went right past me that I didn't realize were such an important part of being a very good player, that conversation there really completely gave me a 180 on maybe that diva persona, first round guy, where it converted me now to, you know what, that stuff doesn't mean anything. All the things that took me to get here, I have to start over and do that again. And it recircuited my mind and became the lunch pail, blue collar, head down, grind kind of player that every single day from that point on, literally 4 months into my career. And I truly believe that day defined me and propelled me to playing the 12 seasons that I did, because of the fact of that conversation and the humbling experience I had from one of the greatest that ever coached the game.
All right. So I got something for you, Anthony. This is going to make you giggle, I hope, here. So in 2000, that exact fall, the Harvard Business Review published an article written by Parcells called "The Tough Work of Turning Around a Team." And I've extracted a quote from it that I'm going to read to you that we could build off it. And quite frankly, I got to tell you, we studied this paper, this article that he wrote in my class at NYU with the students. Here it is. I found that holding frank one-on-one conversations with every member of the organization is essential to success. It allows me to ask each player for his support in helping the team achieve its goals. And it allows me to explain exactly what I expect from him. And then he goes on to say something later in the article. It's not that long of an article. Here it is, Anthony. Confrontation doesn't mean putting someone down. When you criticize members of the team, you need to put it in a positive context. So however he said it, the bleep, bleep, bleep to you, he got a positive result. Let's start with something you said earlier in this conversation, which was last night was your first team meeting. I want to hear how you went into that. What was the first thing you said? What was the tone that you set? And just evaluate it for us. Take us in that first team meeting last night, if you could.
Yeah. Listen, I had not met most of these players. They were all drafted a few weeks ago. And I think the perception to me is just, I wanted to be real and be me. I wanted them to understand that I'm going to be a little different than maybe any other head coach that they've had that they played for. I think that these players have been with so many different coaches, college. They've tried to get to the highest point, then they bounced around with these spring leagues or overseas or wherever that may be, or they just quite frankly haven't played in a few years, that their dream is there. But I think for me is selling to them that I'm going to do everything I can to make sure that what we do in the XFL, a league of opportunity, is give these guys an opportunity to showcase what their talents are. And there's some threshold and some barrier right now that's stopping them from getting to the next level and getting to the next step. And some of these guys may never do that. But it's my job to make sure and letting them know that I am doing everything possible for them to get them to that next step, to max them out, to change them. I think there's 3 tiers of players. You have a great player that's trying to be elite. There's not many that are elite. Very few get there. The great players always they always have a very thorough, thought out, defined plan on what they want, but they're seeking the information and they're always continually trying to grasp that information, even though they're a great player and everybody knows that they're great, but they feel like, oh, they already made it, but they want more and they want that information. Then there's that good player trying to be great, right? And a lot of these players they want to ask the questions. They're following, they're shadowing. They don't know what it is to be great. They see the greatness. They know they have a skill set, but they're not quite sure how they can take that jump to being great, because most of the players want to be at the great level. If they get to the great level, that line right there is great. Even though the elite is where everybody wants to try to be, they also know that being great is a pinnacle point where they can get there. So they're always trying to listen, take extra notes. They're pulling you aside, asking you everything possible to get to the point where they can get to that next jump. And then there's that tier of players, quite frankly, I think where I am with the XFL. They think they're good enough. They think they're great enough. And there's always something else out there that's holding them back, but they don't realize that what's really holding them back is themselves. And instead of them trying to find and exasperate the information from you and ask those questions, to be a great leader is to recognize those type of people and be able to initiate those maybe low-hanging fruits or the limitations that they have in their game or whatever it is in business, and being able to offer them those things to help them raise up. Being proactive in everything you do is huge. Being able to understand your lacks and your needs is a great, I would say, a great kind of way to advance yourself. But some folks just, quite frankly, don't understand that yet. And I think the players at this level need to know that they are limited in certain areas. It may be just because of their play, it may be their mental capacity, it may be the way they structure things, it may be the way they go about things, it may be because they're disgruntled about somebody. They have to understand that in order to advance, okay, you have to open up your mind and be retaught. You have to open up regardless of age. We have a lot of different age levels. We have a 30-year-old quarterback and I have a 22-year-old linebacker. There is a mixture of different pieces there, but they're all trying to get somewhere, but they're not quite sure. And I want to make sure that I offer them the best staff, a staff that understands the game of football, number one, which is important, but how do you communicate that? How do you pull aside a guy and teach them the best way for them to learn? Because, the old way is you sit in a room, you teach everybody, and they need to figure it out. But quite frankly, that doesn't work for everybody. So just like you talked about Bill Parcells, how he pulled guys aside, I didn't know that about him. But I know is for me is I need to understand each and every player in the building. I need to know what makes them tick. I need to know what their limitations are. They may not think they have limitations, but it's my job to find out those limitations because I picked them. They're the guys that I believe from a skill set can help me. But the only way it can help me succeed and win championships and be the best is if I can find out what that weakness is and how I can help them get better at that weakness to make them either a good player or a great player. So I think in that first meeting, that's what I did. I tried to make them understand that's the kind of coach that I'm going to be. That's the kind of coach, someone that cares about what they do, but I can still be stern. I can still be very strong on the accountability part, the part that they have to fulfill those needs of what every coach wants, but understand that I'm a person like them. I understand what they've gone through and why they're there. And yeah, I was a first round pick, but there were those layers we talked about that I understand what it took to get there. And I was in their shoes at one point and finding them to get to the point where they can say, okay, you know what? I can get to the NFL. This is what the difference is. I'm going to help them, or it's going to make them understand, you know what? I've reached my pinnacle. Coach Becht, his staff, they did it the way that made me know, like, okay, this is where I've maxed out. And if I can't get there, at least they can go and put their head on the pillow at night when we're all done the season and say, you know what? It's just not, this is the max. This is where I'm going to be. And I think that's the fine line of just getting guys to buy into that. And that's going to be a day-to-day, everyday type of piece because these players that I have under my leadership are constantly looking for reasons. They're always like, why can't I? Well, let's change that and say, okay, this is what you can do. These are the things we have to do. These are things you have to persistently do every day, and give them those kind of streamlined bullet points so that they can follow that every day so that they can maximize themselves on a day-to-day basis.
Love that. In my years of leadership, Anthony, I used to call that, what you're referring to is emptying the tank. Listen, here's the meeting. Here's the message. If you have anything to say, let's talk about it now. Empty the tank. Let's surface what's going on right now. So there's no meetings, to your point, meetings after the meeting. So Anthony Becht, the CEO of the St. Louis BattleHawks, is giving the mission statement per se, or what we're going to work on today. The position coaches take it to the respective rooms, and exactly what you said. You don't want any side conversations. If it's all playing into what your messaging is, those side conversations are beautiful and they're fueling up now what you're saying and reinforcing. Then that's beautiful. But you don't want to, coach said this, you articulated that perfectly. So setting those foundational elements right now as the season is kicking off. Let's back up a little bit and kind of extend it into the greater level. The messaging from Dwayne Johnson and Danny Garcia when they hired you. What was their messaging to you? What was that recruiting process like to get you to be the head coach of the BattleHawks? That's very interesting, I'm sure, to our listeners.
Yeah, I was not on their radar, Chris. I can tell you that much. In a short abridged story on how this all went down, when Dwayne Johnson and Danny Garcia and Jerry Cardinal from Redbird Capital purchased the XFL in August of 2020 through bankruptcy, And through my experiences coaching in the AAF, which was a similar spring league in 2019 under the head coaching staff of Mike Martz, which really triggered me to know that I could do this. When that bankruptcy was awarded to them, that day I wrote down, I got my notebook out, and I said, I am going to be a head coach in the XFL. Didn't know anybody involved. Didn't know anybody that was going to be part of it. Clearly didn't know who The Rock was or Danny Garcia or any of that. But I started saying, okay, how do I get close to these people? How do I get into those doors? And the first thing I did was I went back to the old XFL and started jotting down names of importance and starting to cross-section names and lines of people that I didn't know, but who did they know? And then I came up with one name was Russ Brandon. Russ Brandon was a longtime president of the Buffalo Bills, very tied into the NFL. At that time, he was consulting for the XFL. He did not take on a position. I found a way that we had two common people that we were both tight with that knew each other well, excuse me, and we were able to coordinate a phone call. And I was able to talk to him, and he was like, listen, we hit it off great too, because our sons both played college football and, all these different, NFL, and he was with the Bills when I was with the Jets. We knew each other. We never had a conversation in depth. But we hit it off, and he's like, listen, I'm just consulting for the league. I have no tie or anything yet. I don't know where they're going, but give me your resume. And I can promise you that when these times come, we'll get you in front of those people so you can get an opportunity. Boom. Hung up the phone. Months go by. Going into 2021, they start hiring people, and Russ Brandon becomes the president of the XFL. I'm thinking, wow, I already spoken to this man. I have his number. Start texting him sporadically, just kind of, didn't really get a lot of messaging back. Once hey, don't worry about when the time comes, this and that. And then some other people got hired. Mark Ross, a longtime player personnel in the NFL, and then Doug Whaley, a longtime GM. These were the three most important people under ownership. So I had to find a way to get in front of these people. So in December of 2022, no, wait, where are we? Are we in 2022 right now? Yeah, we're in I'm losing track of the years because all these things happen. But we're in 2022. So 2021 December, I have a couple Jets games that I'm working every month at the on the weekends of December. I hit up Mark Ross, who lives in New Jersey. I said, listen, I'm coming in every weekend. I want to have let's have coffee. Had some common people reach out, gets back to me. He's like, okay, you know what? It was this first weekend that I told him I was coming in, which was 4 days away. He's like, meet me Saturday morning at 9:00 at the coffee shop in Hoboken. Let's have a conversation. I was like, great. Went down. He didn't know me for anything. I didn't know him. That coffee turned into a 3-hour conversation. I think I blew him off his feet. I sold him on a vision. I sold him on why I would be an important piece of one of their head coaches for the league and why it would be important. And I think I left a good impression. So he leaves. Nothing happens. I haven't really heard much. Go to the Super Bowl in February, and I get a call I'm out there with my wife in California, get a call from Russ Brandon. He says, hey, meet me at the Beverly Hills Hilton or the Beverly Hills Hotel at 4:00 today. Can you do it? I say, absolutely. So I went over there. We have a couple cocktails, and he's like, listen, we're impressed by you. We want this league to be about opportunity, not only for players, but for coaches. And we feel like, you're going to be a great fit for one of those coaches. And I'm thinking to myself, okay, is he offering me the job? It wasn't like it was kind of like a in passing kind of thing. Like you got it, but it's not like official. So I wasn't really sure how to take it. But I was like, oh, okay, this is great. So I have my wife's there, and after we're done, we had this great conversation. He's like, well, I got to get you in front of ownership. I'll get back to you. I was like, okay, everything's kind of scrambling at that point. Go to my wife, and I'm like, I think I just got the job. I was like, I'm not sure. She's like, what? She's like, what are you talking about? So I'm like, well, I don't know. He says ownership's going to get a hold of me. Let's see. So a couple weeks later, I get an email from Mark Ross. He's like, hey, got you set up for a Zoom mid-February with Danny Garcia. I was like, okay. I'm like, get in front of the boss. I was like, all right, get in front of her. And the initial line from her was, she was awesome, by the way. She is a stud, and she's going to be one of our great leaders, not only for our league, but just across the board. She's like, Anthony, it's great to meet you. She's like, I've heard so much about you. We've studied you, everything. We've crossed our T's, dotted our I's. And I just want to let you know, this is not an interview. I just wanted to welcome you to the XFL family. You are going to be one of our head coaches for the XFL. And I just, there's a lot of in between steps that went on. But Chris, think about this. I have no connection to The Rock and Danny Garcia. I have no connection to any of these people. Never once was I on their radar. Persistence, recircuiting the wires, all right? Driven and have a drive to find connections and get in front of the people that matter are the hardest things you can do in any profession. And I was able to do that. And a lot of people didn't believe me then, just like they didn't believe me when I went to West Virginia, or I was going to be a first-round pick, or I was going to be successful in broadcasting. Oh, you're going to be the head coach of the XFL. Sure, yeah. Good luck. Let me know how it goes. That'd be great. And it happened. And it happened because I was ready for the moment. I was persistent for the opportunity. And quite frankly, you have to close the deal. And I was truthful with them. I was open with them. And my experiences as a player, as a broadcaster, as an analyst, as someone, I've been working with the NFL, helping guys transition from the league to retirement. Those things encompassed what they were looking for, one piece of the 8 head coaches that they had in the XFL. And now it's my time to take advantage of. So here I am in another situation at the bottom rung, first time, eyes on you. How do you make that a success now moving forward? So now I have a new plan. I have another 5-year plan in my mind, how this is going to happen. And we'll see. I'll work on it just like I worked on everything else, just how I learned to be great on everything else I did, and use that to recircuit myself, to start from scratch, to find out how to be great at something again. And, hey, I may or may not be, who knows? But again, the opportunity was given to me, and I'm not going to mess it up.
You have a ton of self-awareness. So to be so self-aware and analyze each of those victories in your life, at West Virginia, well, backing up to being a 13-year-old and having that monumental Babe Ruth team, and then manifesting it into a good high school career, and then getting to West Virginia, seeing that opening to get that singular scholarship with the other tight end going someplace else. And then you look at your NFL career, 12 years, then broadcasting at ESPN for 7.5. And then you sat down one day and you said, quote, "I'm going to be a head coach in the XFL." What are you putting out to the world if you were to look at yourself from, a gigantic mountaintop and looking down at you conducting these areas of your life? What do you think, what qualities are you putting out in the world that is allowing you to manifest these milestones in your life? I find it fascinating, and I love your energy, not only as a friend and a colleague, but as you're exuding this enthusiasm for your current endeavor. How are you doing this?
I would say this: there is no opportunity too big or too small that is not attainable. The problem is it's hard. Again, we always see the finished product of people and we think, wow, like what a success, and all these nice things, all the things they're doing. You have to be driven, okay? And I've talked about all the things that have been a success in my life. Chris, I've had more failures than anybody that I've known in my life. But I've always learned from them failures. I've made a ton of mistakes in my life. Nothing where it made the paper, which I'm thankful for, and I'm always nervous for every day of my life. But I've always been able to try to make good on those things from those examples and better myself. And I think that sometimes when we look at things and we want things, like when I left the league in the NFL, like everybody would always say, "Oh man, now you're out in the real world. You're never going to see a paycheck like that again." Or I'm like, well, why not? Why can't you be great at something else? Why can't you attain those goals? Is it get harder? Is there a little more fogginess in the path because it's something different and something new? Yes. But I was successful at something the prior step before. And I learned important qualities about myself that maybe I didn't quite know were there. I mean, I left the game of football. I mean, I forgot about all the things that I had learned that, quite frankly, fit into the real world: the leadership qualities, the accountability, dependability, the drive, the sacrifice, the want. When people doubt you, and being able to overcome that, and really the downs. I mean, just for lack of a better terms, the lulls and downs of not knowing what you could become after you've done something for so long. That affects a lot of players, a lot of people in my industry, regardless of the money or the resources that they have. It's what's going to make them feel important moving forward in their life, and how that map's going to look at. Everything's been mapped out in the game of an athlete, because you can see what you want, and there are paths you can go because you know. But when you get out of that and now you step over and there's a whole new map, but yet there's all these roads and you're not quite sure and you don't have GPS, how do you navigate those maps? And you know what? Yep, you're going to have to take a road to the right, and maybe you should have went straight. It's a longer path, but it helped you figure out that longer loop around to get back on the path. And I think one thing I've always been in my life to this day is as much as I've accomplished in my life, I've always listened to everyone. And I've always made everyone else's opinions matter, and everybody else's success is important, because they are. And I've tried to always treat people with the respect of, it's really never about me when I meet someone, the impression that I want to give off. I just want to let people know I care about, they've taken the time to come up to me and offer their assistance or their time, or just want to say hello. That they mean something to me. It's not just a, hey, handshake and, an autograph, whatever it may be in every facet of life. I think the best compliment I ever got from somebody is, I made it to the NFL, became a first-round pick, and got into broadcasting. I go home and spend some time back home, and people will come up to me, and guys that I played with that were much better players than me, and it's like, man, Beck, the one thing about you, man, he's like, you're still the same guy. You're still the same guy the day you left to now. He's like, all the stuff that you've done, all these different things, you're still calling us, hanging out at the same local bars, and having the same conversations. And I think, to me, like, why do you have to change in that sense? You can change your path in life. You can change the way you get to the different rungs of success that you've gotten there. But why do you have to change who you are as a person and the values you were when you were 13 years old, playing in a baseball champion in the World Series, to where I am now as a head coach in the XFL? I just think, genuinely, I've tried to be that person every day of my life, and just tried to be the same. And if I think that's good enough for people, and I think people are sometimes shocked of the availability or the way that I maybe interact with them, or just give them the time, because I just feel like, people have given me time over the years, and I was a really good listener. I have time to listen to others as well.
I love it. And it's so true. You exemplify this. You always have a smile on your face in our interactions, the same enthusiasm, the humility, and you emphasize listening and being selfless. All great traits of a great leader. Do you think The Rock saw something in you that perhaps was similar to his story, overcoming adversity with his football career, and then onto wrestling with fame and fortune, and now into the movies? But he did have trying times, growing up and transitioning and trying to be a professional football player. Do you think he saw something, in you, that you have some humility, yet you've had a lot of success?
I think so. I mean, obviously, as you look at each of the coaches that got the opportunities, you have well-versed coaches with big names. You have former Pro Bowler, Hall of Fame players, and you have guys that have just grinded through, that really exemplify some of the characteristics that they want in the league. One thing about Dwayne Johnson is he keeps talking about how driven he was. He wanted to be an NFL player so bad. I mean, that's all he wanted in life. I mean, he tried so hard. He got the opportunity in Miami. He talks about Warren Sapp coming into town and how that kind of changed where he was on the depth chart and what his opportunities were at that time. And he always mentions the number 54. Anytime you see him with the XFL or wearing a tight Under Armour shirt, you always see that number 54, because in the NFL, there's a 53-man roster. And he was that 54th guy. Now, privately, between me and you, I'd probably say he was more like 72, 73. That's just what it was in reality. But in the sense of what he's talking about, he was always the last guy out. And I think, that drove him to do other things in his life that, quite frankly, we know now and see now every single day. He's arguably the most famous person in the world. But man, he is great. He's great to work for. He understands and remembers those moments, and it's made him important. Everything he's gone through. $7 Productions. He had $7 in his pocket, when he became that that other guy after football. But that's exactly what it is. It's about the opportunity that he couldn't get. The league wasn't there, and that's why Danny Garcia, they talk about it all the time. It's a league of opportunity.
Yes, it is a league of opportunities, and Anthony is right in the middle of it. We thank him for being the first guest ever on the Keep the Line Moving podcast. And look at this. He created opportunities in high school, West Virginia, in the NFL, and now with the XFL. And these types of conversations, this is what we're going to have on this podcast. Anthony was perfect as a first guest. He was resilient. He persevered. He told his leadership story. He even told us about the first meeting he ever had with his XFL team. That is valuable. I hope you agree. And we'll continue to have conversations just like this, including one next week. So thanks again, everybody. Continue to keep the line moving wherever you may get your audio, podcasts, or anything. Leave a review, subscribe, do what you want to do. We appreciate it. For Paul Salazar, our podcast producer, I'm Chris Gargano, your host. I will see you next week. Take care, everybody.